This episode may contain content of a graphic nature, including descriptions of physical and sexual violence against adults, children, and animals. Listener discretion is advised. Hi everyone, I'm Talia.
And I'm Tanya.
And together we are Crimes and Consequences, a true crime podcast. Hi, Tanya.
Hi, Talia.
How are you?
I'm doing decent today.
Oh, good. Decent is...
Decent.
Decent's fine.
I guess I got nothing to complain about, I suppose.
Oh, we still could.
I could find something.
Yeah, there's always something. Well, I could complain about my throat because I sound like, I don't know.
A frog, I don't know.
Like I had a lot of cigarettes and booze last night, but I didn't. Are you ready for this week's episode?
I am.
This story I was particularly fond of, but I never did it. I put it off for years, and now we're going to do it today.
Now we're going to do it.
But before we do it, I'm going to ask everybody to hit the subscribe/follow button on your favorite app, whatever one you're listening to us on, and just ask you guys to forgive me for my voice because it is kind of hard to talk. And then I'm going to start.
All right, let's go.
Unless you got something else to add.
No.
Okay, good. So this is about Christopher Wilder. And I told you about him like a couple years ago. I read 2 books on him. He's got the moniker of Beauty Queen Killer. It was a 7-week time span when he hunted, captured, tortured, and killed 8 different women across the United States.
Jeez.
But many of you might know about him because when I did that one episode, it was the Wanda Beach murders.
It was an Australian one, right?
Yes. Christopher Wilder lived near there at the time. And so some people think that was an unsolved case, that maybe he had something to do with it.
Maybe.
I don't know.
I don't know.
I haven't solved it yet. It's on my list. Even though we know he killed 8 different women, there's a lot of stuff we don't know. And he took those secrets with him because he died before anything could really be revealed.
Bummer.
Yeah, but we know a lot, okay?
Okay.
But when you know a lot and there's a lot of shit to know, there's a lot of shit you don't know when someone dies. Let me just give you a little background. Christopher Wilder was born March 13th, 1945 in Sydney, Australia. His father was an American naval officer and his mother was Australian. He almost died at birth, but he ended up recovering. And then he almost drowned in the swimming pool when he was 2.
Oh my gosh.
His childhood was stable. He came from a good family. That is one thing that I know. He came from a good family. But he was like a weirdo from a young age. I'm just being honest with everybody. He did window peeking.
Oh, geez.
In his adolescence. He had blonde hair. He was blue-eyed. He was charming. He seemed not threatening. But that wasn't even close to who he really was. One of the first big things that is noted in Chris's history is that at a young age, he demonstrated signs of sexual aberrance. He was involved in this gang rape on a city beach at the age of 17.
Seriously?
It was one of those situations where he's at a beach, he's good looking, he's with his friends, there's these girls. There was an incident that happened with a girl, and he told the girl that if she had sex with him, he'd protect her from the other teenagers who were holding her captive, promising he wouldn't let anybody bother her. And she was really desperate, so she agreed. And then he laughed because he broke his word. And he raped her, and he had some friends. It was really his friends that were there with him. And they say he was the leader of it, really. So there's different versions of how this went down. But in the end, he pled guilty and got a year of probation.
Seriously? A year probation?
A year of probation. So basically, you had a girl in a car that got raped at the beach. He had to go to counseling.
Mm-hmm.
During his counseling sessions, his therapist learned that he had some really disturbing fantasies of rape.
Yeah, I'm not surprised.
So he was given electric shock treatments.
What?
Absolutely.
Oh, God. Oh, my God.
That was back in the day.
Yeah, it had to have been like the 60s, right?
It was just, an attempt to help him refocus his energy.
Yeah, nothing like an electroshock therapy to help you refocus. What the fuck?
He seemed normal on the surface. That's what I was telling you, right? He's a good-looking guy. He's hanging out at the beach. He liked to surf, but he had really dark thoughts when it came to women. And he had OCD. He would wash his hands until they were raw. He would drink gallons of water each day. Like, he was cleansing himself from the inside and out. So he's a little bit weird.
Yeah.
In 1968, he was 23 years old and he got married. So almost immediately, his new wife found a pair of another woman's underwear and pornographic photos in his car.
Oh, boy.
She also accused him of sexually abusing her, raping her, and claimed he tried to kill her. And that marriage did not last but a couple weeks.
Yeah, no shit, right? I mean, if you're finding that stuff the first couple weeks you're married, yeah.
Yeah. It probably doesn't lead to a happy marriage.
No, I can't imagine.
The next year, 24-year-old Chris emigrated to the U.S. Because remember, he's also a U.S. citizen. His dad was from the U.S. And he moved to Boynton Beach, Florida.
Oh, sounds nice.
He made a fortune in construction. He developed a construction company and started doing real estate. He made a lot. Like, he was a very successful businessman. He purchased a customized Porsche 911.
Ooh, nice.
And he raced it. He had a speedboat and a really nice bachelor pad. Like, he is living it up.
Yeah, so why you gotta be such a fucking weirdo? Right?
Right? I don't know.
I don't know.
There's always some girl that's going to latch on to a rich guy.
Of course. Beautiful girls.
Because it's about power.
Yeah, that's true. And control.
He also took an interest in photography, and he bought really expensive high-end cameras. This was a hobby of his, but it was really just a way to lure beautiful women back to his home and take pictures of them.
Gross. Creepy.
Yes. I remember being at a mall and having some old creepy guy tell me that I should be a model, and he had a camera and wanted me to go back to his place. And I'm like, no. Like, I didn't fall for the shit.
Yeah.
Chris spent his time prowling South Florida beaches in search of women he could solicit. In 1971, and keep in mind he's 26, he was arrested on Pompano Beach for demanding that two young women pose nude for him. Now, remember when I was talking about the Wanda Beach murders? There were a couple guys that were approaching them and stuff, and that's why they think that, he lived in that same area at the same time and he'd already raped somebody. So
right.
Maybe, I don't know. In 1974, now he's 29, he convinced a girl to come back to his house under the promise that she would get a modeling contract.
Oh, no.
Instead, he drugged and raped her. But he didn't do any prison time for any of these crimes, believe it or not. He always seemed to get away with it. Without any consequences, Chris's actions only became more sordid. In 1982, he was visiting his parents in Sydney, and now he's 37. So who knows what the fuck he did in between. He abducted two 15-year-old girls, forced them to get naked, took pornographic photos of them. He ended up getting arrested and charged with kidnapping and sexual assault. But Australian authorities released him on $376,000 in American dollars bail. And his parents posted the bond. He left Australia, guess what? He didn't. He was just like, fuck, I'm out of here.
Yeah.
And he went back to Florida. He promised his parents, I will return for that trial.
I really will.
I will. You're not going to lose all that money.
Psych.
And that was scheduled for April of 1984. When Chris was back in Florida, he continued being successful. Just looking at Chris from the outside, you'd see the single man that women would find attractive. He owned his own home now. He had a swimming pool, a thriving business, and raced cars with a boat. He's good,
Seems like he's got it all.
Yeah, I mean, some people think he's good looking. I don't think he's good looking, but that's fine. He is 6 feet tall with this mustache. It's very well trimmed. But there was something that turned women off about Chris. Because you're like, what's the problem? You were saying earlier, what's the problem?
Because it's fucking weird.
Yeah, because lots of them wanted to be his friend, but really not many wanted to go on dates with him. Maybe they wanted to use his boat.
Maybe.
Ride in that fast car.
Maybe,
swim in his pool.
Yeah.
But they didn't want to kiss him.
They didn't want to date him.
No, because he's creepy. Maybe it was a sixth sense or a gut feeling, I don't know, that he was a little dangerous. But he finally met a woman that he saw completely perfect for him. Her name was Beth Canyon. And she was 21.
And he's what, 30-something?
Yes, he's 37.
Oh, boy.
She met him at the Miss Florida beauty pageant.
Oh.
Chris introduced himself as a professional
Of
photographer.
course.
He had an expensive camera around his neck, and he was taking pictures of all the contestants. But Beth and Chris were never really a couple, at least not the way he had hoped it would be. For one thing, she's 16 years younger than him, and she was already dating a lot of other guys. She considered him to be really just a friend, but he didn't see it that way. You know, that's where he's the weirdo part.
Yeah.
That's the weirdo part. He was infatuated with Beth. He asked Beth to marry him.
Wow.
And they'd only known each other briefly. At the time, she didn't realize when she told him no, like, this would really devastate him. Because she's thinking to herself, I barely know you. I'm dating other people.
Yeah, she's got a normal view
You're
of
an
it.
old guy with a receding hairline. Like, okay.
Like, no thanks.
No. Beth continued to be friends with Chris, and she did trust him as a friend. She was totally oblivious to the fact he was obsessed with her, even though he did ask her to marry him.
Yeah.
I think she thought he got over it. At the age of 39, Chris arranged to race his Porsche in the 1984 Miami Grand Prix during the last week of February. He had this dark sports car number 51, and that was familiar to race fans, as Chris was too, because I told you he was
All over the racing circuit,
yes,
right?
he was. On February 26th, he was seen around the track, and so was a woman named 21-year-old Rosario Chari, I think was what she went by, Gonzalez. Rosario was pretty, dark-eyed girl with dreams of succeeding as a model. She, among several other attractive women, were hired by a pharmaceutical company to pass out free samples of a new pill containing aspirin to racing fans.
Oh.
Get some pretty girls.
Yeah, give him some.
Aspirin to hand out to people.
Would you like a sample of this new product? What? From a pharmaceutical company?
God bless the USA.
God, I love the 80s, man.
Rosario left her home in Homestead, Florida, drove north for 23 miles, and arrived at the parking lot of a hotel close to the racetrack. She picked up her tray of samples at the pharmaceutical company's tent at about 8:30 in the morning, and it was a Sunday. It was shortly after 1 p.m. when Rosario dropped her sample tray at the company tent, saying she was going to take a lunch break and then she'd be right back. But she never came back.
Uh-oh.
Rosario told her parents she'd probably be home for supper in Homestead between 6 and 7 p.m. that Sunday. When she wasn't there by 9, they were worried to the point that they called the Florida Highway Patrol, see if her car broke down or there was some
Right,
accident
yeah.
or something like that. When she wasn't home by 3 a.m., they knew something was really, really wrong. I mean, she loved her home. She had a fiance she was in love with. I mean, she's planning her wedding. There's no reason for her to run away. So something bad had to have happened.
Yeah, I'm sure she would have called too, right?
Exactly. Miami homicide detectives were put on the case, but they had very few witnesses who remembered seeing her on that Sunday afternoon. One of the other models who handed out aspirin said that she and her mother had seen Rosario. They said she was following a man or maybe walking behind him in a crowd. He was white. He looked as if he was in his late 30s, and there wasn't a lot to go on. They did a sketch of him, and then it was distributed to the media. The Miami Herald printed a story about Rosario's disappearance, and a scattering of sightings trickled in. A man from Pompano Turnpike called police to say he'd seen a girl resembling her jumping out of a car near the turnpike of some plaza, and that she was running. And there were 2 men that chased after her, caught her. It looked like there was a struggle with her, and they were beating her, and they forced her back into the car. The motorist said that he followed their car, and it turned off on to some exit for Boca Raton, and he managed to get the last 3 numbers of the license plate. But that wasn't much help. And my question is, why did he wait till the story came out?
Yeah, right?
Maybe he went to the police, and then maybe he went to the Miami Herald. On Monday, March 5th, only a week after Rosario's disappearance, Beth didn't come home to the apartment she shared with her roommate. The roommate assumed she was most likely maybe at her parents' house. And she wasn't really worried until someone at her work, she worked at this high school, called asking why Beth hadn't come in. Beth worked at the high school. The roommate then called Beth's parents and learned they hadn't seen her, and they notified the Metro-Dade County Police. There was 3 days that passed with no word from Beth. On Thursday, March 11th, Beth's Chrysler convertible, that was the car she'd driven away from the high school in, it was found at a parking lot at the Miami International Airport. When police did some research and investigation, they didn't see Beth's name listed on any flights going out of Miami for any of the days that she'd been missing, or even like a little before or anything. So the Kenyans, that's Beth's family, they hired a private investigator. Beth's photograph became really familiar to the people that lived in southern Florida. One man who learned she was missing worked at the service station in Coral Gables, and that's where she usually bought her gas. He remembered the last time he seen her. It was Monday, March 8th, shortly before his shift ended at 3 p.m. She'd been driving her convertible, and she was talking with a man who drove a Cadillac Eldorado. The attendant recalled the conversation to investigators, so I guess he's like listening. He's like,
Eavesdropping.
Eavesdropping. She was asking, am I dressed all right? Who will be taking my picture? And then he said that he went to go clean her windshield, and she said, don't worry about that. I'm late for the airport. So that's what this witness says. It's weird.
It is weird.
She's just going to the airport and didn't tell anybody.
Right.
According to the service station attendant, the man in the Cadillac paid for her gas, and he followed her car out of the station. And that was the last reported sighting of Beth. Her mother went through all of her photo albums and took out pictures that she could show to the gas station attendant just to make sure like this was really Beth. Just to see if the attendant recognized any of Beth's friends or anybody else in all these pictures that were close to Beth.
Yeah.
And she was surprised when he pointed out Chris as being the man in the Cadillac that day.
Oh, shit.
Beth's mom remembered a little bit about Chris, knew that Beth considered him a friend, and knew that he gave her some unexpected proposal, but never thought that he would be an abductor because he seemed polite and sweet. One time he even joined the family for a dinner. When the police reached out to Chris, he said he had known Beth, but he hadn't seen her in a while, of course.
Yeah,
Hadn't seen her in a fucking while.
Haven't seen her.
He said he couldn't have possibly been with her at the gas station on Monday because he was busy working.
He's up her ass every other day, but nope.
Yeah, because remember, he's still stalking her and she
right.
doesn't even know it. He called Beth's parents and reassured them that he, would fully cooperate with the investigators. But that's when the investigators started digging into Chris's past. They learned he wasn't anything like the perfect gentleman he claimed to be. No.
He got a record.
And then when they learned that he drove a race car, they started thinking about Rosario.
Oh, yeah.
And how she disappeared. And they dug a little more. They found out that Chris was there with his sports car that weekend. And then they're like, ding, 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 ding. Something's going on.
There's no such thing as a coincidence, right?
Not when it comes to serial killers.
No.
Another photographer who'd been at the Grand Prix that weekend told detectives that Chris had presented himself as a photographer, as well as a contractor and a race car driver.
He is a jack of all trades.
One-stop shop. He had a very expensive camera around his neck on that Sunday. He saw Chris walk past the pharmaceutical company's tent. And this other photographer vividly remembered that Chris stared openly at the girls who were handing out the free samples of aspirin.
Oh, no. Of course he was, because he's gross.
He could place Chris within 10 feet of Rosario before she disappeared. Investigators were now sure Chris was responsible for both disappearances. And we're on Monday, March 12th now. Investigators invested his construction company in plain clothes.
Yeah.
We're harmless. We're just here to be friends. Can I ask you some questions? And they asked him questions. Chris told him the same story. He'd been working that Monday when Beth was last seen. He even had a fellow employee give an alibi, and it was kind of weird. He said, Chris is always down in Boca in the morning, then back here in the afternoon. He's always here in the afternoon. That was the alibi.
Always, sure.
Just always here.
He's always here.
Yeah, that's solid. However, the man who gave Chris his alibi also blurted out something about, quote, a girl's car found at the airport, and then acted as if he wanted to take it back. That's what you told me, wasn't it, Chris?
Oh.
Chris is like, what? Looked at him with daggers.
Yeah.
What the?
Shut your mouth. I was talking about.
Chris answered, yes, her mother told me that. But when investigators checked with Beth's mom, she never told them anything about that. Not to mention, that was information the police had chosen to keep quiet. You know how they always keep some info quiet so they can weed out those people that randomly confess to murders that didn't do it. Yet Chris knew exactly where Beth's convertible had been found, and so did his employee.
Yeah, how would he know?
The police found it very difficult to receive a search warrant because they didn't feel like they had enough probable cause. They had no blood, no signs of struggle, no bullet fragments, no torn clothing, or anything that even suggested that Beth was dead.
Yeah.
In the meantime, Chris is still seeing a counselor because he's on probation. And he failed to show up for an appointment Thursday, March 15th. Instead, he headed to the ocean and he went to the Daytona Beach Motel and checked in. He was going to creep up and down that sandy strip and talk to women he met there because he is a perv.
Mm-hmm.
That's when he met 15-year-old Colleen Osborne. But before I tell you more about what happened with Colleen, we're going to take a quick break. And we're back. 15-year-old Colleen Osborne disappeared in Daytona at Daytona Beach that same day. No one could say it was Chris, for sure, who was responsible for her vanishing, but her body was never found.
Oh, no.
On Friday, the Miami Herald broke the story about the race car driver who was a suspect in the disappearance of both Beth and Rosario. They did everything but print his name and a picture of him, and this freaked him the fuck out. He's like, fuck. Quietly, Chris withdrew his savings from the bank account, using some of the money to purchase a 1973 Chrysler New Yorker that had very low mileage. Then he took his 3 big dogs to a kennel, and he left them there before taking off and getting the fuck out of South Florida. Chris was now a man with a plan, and it wasn't a good plan. He was going to target amateur models at shows in the malls of America.
Ew.
He thought would-be models and starlets would be more vulnerable because of their ambition, and his goal was to take full advantage of them. Fuck his construction company and his house and his pool and his boat.
What a
and all
weirdo,
that.
man.
He's just going to take off in his fucking car.
Yeah, with his life savings, just to be a weirdo.
He was immaculately dressed with a neatly trimmed beard, and he blended in the crowds. I mean, if you see pictures of him, he looks like an ordinary guy.
Yeah, he just looks like a regular guy.
But when you, hear about him, then all of a sudden you look at him, you're like, yeah, he's definitely a fucking creep. I should have saw that. He's a fucking creep. He had fake business cards all set up.
Man, it's a lot of effort.
He was a representative of a modeling agency. And as I said, he's got that expensive camera, and he's got it strapped around his neck. And he would just smile and encourage these models.
Just playing the part.
So gross.
I know.
St. Patrick's Day found Chris 100 miles north of Boynton Beach at a shopping mall on Merritt Island. Don't know where that is. I think it's still in Florida,
Yeah,
though.
I think it's in Florida.
Teresa Ferguson, she was 21. She was a stepdaughter of a police captain in Indian Harbor. Teresa hoped to become a model, and she was certainly very, very beautiful. She had huge brown eyes, big smile, and a lot of thick, dark hair. She took her time shopping in the mall that Saturday afternoon. At some point, she was approached by a man, a creeper, with sandy hair and a very neat beard. Shoppers in the mall would recall seeing her talking to him. She didn't seem alarmed. She was actually smiling and nodding because he's probably telling her how beautiful you are.
Oh, yeah.
You should be a model. And coincidentally,
I'm a photographer.
I'm looking for models.
Yeah.
It's my job.
It's my job.
In a seemingly unconnected incident, a man whose car was struck in the sand near West Cocoa Beach had to call a tow truck that day. It was sometime between 3 and 3 p.m. when there was this call for a tow truck to come in. The truck driver responded to find a man about 40, balding, with a nice short trimmed beard. He had a 1973 Chrysler, and he was trapped along a local road known as Lover's Lane. The man said his trunk was locked and he didn't have a key, but that he didn't have anything in there. They get him out. He's just stuck and he just needs help getting out. He can't get any tools to get himself out, is what he's saying about the trunk.
Okay.
He's got, I can't get in it, but there's nothing in there that would help me. The Chrysler ended up coming out of the sand easily enough. He paid the tow truck driver, and he drove to his Cocoa Beach motel, where he didn't check in his real name, but instead used his poor business partner's name. Fucker. It's like me signing in. Tanya.
Tanya.
Isn't this Tanya? Of course, Teresa Ferguson never returned home, and her parents reported her missing. On March 20th, 3 days later, about 250 miles away in Tallahassee, a 19-year-old Florida State University student named Jill Lennox, she was shopping, because we all like to go to those malls and shop, at the Governor Square Mall. She was slim and blonde. She looked like she'd be a model. And this guy walked up to her and held out his business card. Hey, here you go. At first, according to witnesses, Jill was startled, but not afraid. She's just like, what?
Yeah.
Oh. He explained that he was a professional photographer, and then he couldn't help but notice that she had the kind of beauty that modeling agencies were looking for. Jill smiled, but shook her head when he offered her a job. He told her that she was perfect. He had everything set up back at a studio. If she's interested.
Yeah, come on. I'm ready. Let's do it.
Let's do this now.
Yeah, let's do this now. Drop everything.
But she wasn't interested. He said okay, and he kind of accepted the defeat, but told her that he took some shots of her as she was walking, and he offered to send them to her if he could use them later on. So he wanted her address. He told her that he had some release forms back in his car.
Oh, jeez. He has everything covered.
It's just parked right outside the entrance.
All you gotta do is come out to my car and sign it.
Mm-hmm.
Come on.
Jill thought that seemed safe enough. Like, I'm not going to his studio. I'm just going to go out into a parking lot in the middle of the day. And
in a mall. Where there's probably hundreds of people.
It's broad daylight. So she said, okay. And she walked with him to the car, which wasn't parked nearby like he had described. They talked casually as they strolled, towards the car. And when they got there, he lifted the trunk lid and he was rummaging around looking for the release papers in his trunk. Suddenly he turned and his arm just shot out rapidly. He closed fist hit her in the stomach.
Ooh.
Yeah, knocked the wind out of her. An instant later, she felt this blow to her head and she was all dizzy. Before she could gather her wit to run or fight, this guy was lifting her off her feet and tossing her into the trunk. Then he slammed the lid down and she was just stuck in the darkness. And just tossed around as the car rushed out of the parking lot of the mall.
Damn.
After several minutes, the car stopped, the trunk opened. They were in the country somewhere, but Jill didn't get a long time to really look around. He then tied her hands and feet, and he put a gag over her mouth. And then he closed the trunk again. When the trunk lid finally opened again, it was dark outside, and all she could see was this blurred shape. And there was that creepy guy, Chris. Chris forced her to crawl and wiggle into a sleeping bag, and he zipped it completely around her head. Oh man, she's gagged and tied up, and threw her over his shoulder like basically a sack of potatoes. She's, like I said, gagged. She couldn't make any noise for anyone to hear her. And he tossed her roughly into the bed of the motel. So he's
got her in a, really? So he's in some country motel?
Yeah.
And he's got her in.
That's pretty ballsy.
Yeah, it is. Because it doesn't look like you got a person in that sleeping bag, right?
Right?
Weird.
Really heavy sleeping bag.
Yeah.
There, Jill underwent a terrible ordeal of sexual sadism because Chris was a sexual sadist. She was raped and subjected to every variation of abuse that you could think of. And I mean, we've had...
my God.
I don't have all the details, but he's a sadist.
Yeah, we can imagine.
Yeah, we can imagine.
All the other awful things that have happened to women in our stories.
And he, took his time with her. And once he was satisfied, she realized he's still not done with her. He's not going to let her go. Chris cut the cord of the bedside lamp and peeled back the insulation from the bare wires. Then he plugged the cord back in the wall, and then he held it to her bare feet to shock her with electricity. The shocks were very painful, as you can imagine. She's being electrocuted on her feet. But it wasn't enough to kill her. He demanded that she dance naked and do aerobics.
So fucking weird.
And he would shock her and have her do aerobics dancing in connection with the shocks. Like, shock and then do aerobics. It took him more than 2 hours to get bored with his electric torture.
Oh, my God.
Now he wanted to see, this is bad. Okay, this is bad.
Okay.
He wanted to see if super glue really worked.
Mm.
And he drizzled a bead of glue on the lids of her eyes and forced them closed. And he used a hairdryer to make them dry faster.
Oh, my God.
The glue worked really well, and she couldn't really open her eyes. She could have like a little slit, like a little slice of vision, but she didn't want him to know that. Now, Chris is confident his captive is helpless and blind, and so he lets his guard down, and he starts watching some TV. He would stop every now and then and occasionally zap Jill.
Just for for shits and giggles?
Yeah, just electrocute her. One time, Jill kind of tugged on the cord from the wall, and then she decided, okay, she saw where the cord was. She knew it was attached to the wall. She opened her eyes a little bit, and she headed for the door. He whirled around, and he cracked her over the head with a hairdryer.
Ooh.
Her head split and bled, but she managed to get into the bathroom and lock the door behind her.
Oh, man.
Yeah, she ended up freeing herself from the gag and screamed and screamed and screamed.
Good for her.
While also pounding on the walls and the floor. When she stopped yelling for a minute just to listen if someone was, around, if he's still around, she could hear him scurrying around the motel room, his suitcase being clicked, and then him slamming the door.
Oh, so he was going to take off.
Maybe he's gone. But she didn't trust him. She waited a whole nother half hour before opening the bathroom door. Jill opened the door just a crack and peered out. The room looked empty. But, she's terrified.
Yeah.
She's expecting him to surprise her. She slowly and cautiously comes out further and looks around the room. Keep in mind, her eyes are still glued shut. She can barely see anything. She was hoping she could get her clothes on and get out. Maybe she could make it to the office. And I think it's very interesting that, you're in this deadly situation and you think, you still want to not be naked.
Yeah, right.
Right?
Right.
Just run out naked.
Honestly.
But, I think that's just part of us as humans.
Yeah.
I thought that was kind of interesting. Guess what? She managed to get out.
She did?
And go to the motel manager's office.
Oh, my gosh.
And they called the police. Yay.
Wow, good for her.
Jill didn't know who her kidnapper was, but she had his face memorized. She was determined to do everything she could to get him caught. Every cop in Florida was looking for someone who looked like Chris. And one of the mug shots that Jill looked at, Chris was in it, and she picked him out immediately. He had abducted her and taken her to Georgia against her will, and that's a federal crime. So now the FBI is involved.
Oh, yeah.
And
crossing state lines.
Federal warrant is issued for his arrest. But if you think that stopped him, it did not. The next day, remember I told you about Teresa?
Yeah.
And she'd been missing. She wasn't missing any longer.
Oh.
A crew from an electric company had come across her body in an isolated creek in Polk County, about 100 miles from where she disappeared. She'd been savagely beaten and strangled. Authorities followed Chris's trail to the mall where Teresa vanished, to the bogged-down car and the sandy Lover's Lane, right?
Yeah.
Then to where her body was. They concluded that she'd probably been in the trunk of his car the whole time and probably alive when the tow truck came.
Damn.
She was just gagged and
Bound, probably,
and
right.
I don't know. Now that was the headline all over Florida, as you can imagine, in the Southeast. People who knew Chris were like, what the fuck? Friends at the racetrack told FBI agents that the man they knew, he's a really nice guy. He's kind of shy.
Yeah, right? He would never do this.
He's shy and kind. And a perv.
Yeah.
But they didn't say that. One of the most shocked of Chris's acquaintances was this homicide detective in the Palm Beach County Sheriff's Department. His name was Tom Neighbors. He read a bolo that had come across his office, and he was stunned because he thought he knew Chris really well. He'd had drinks with Chris just on March 8th.
Wow.
They were friends. He just couldn't believe, this guy I just drank with is a rapist and a killer.
And a kidnapper and
But then he remembered
weirdo.
something. He himself had worked a case of sexual assault in 1983 where two barely pubescent girls had been pulled into a Chevy El Camino pickup in Boynton Beach. The driver had taken them down a lonely road and molested them And then, surprisingly, he had driven them back to where they were abducted and let them go. The case had never been solved, even though it happened very close to the police station, and neighbors now realize, Tom neighbors, that it was right by Chris Wilder's construction office.
Oh. The plot thickens.
And that was in 83.
Wow.
An artist's sketch done from the girl's description showed a man with a thick head of hair, but the man looked a lot like Chris, and Chris every now and then put on a toupee.
Oh, really?
So now Tom Neighbors is like,
Yeah.
He arranged for the victims in 1983 to look at some mugshots, and they picked out Chris.
Damn.
That son of a bitch.
It's closing in.
He's on the run now, and he's not done. He's just started, actually.
Oh,
and
shit.
This story gets really, really crazy. I don't want to give too much away, but if you don't know it, it gets crazy.
I don't know it.
You don't know it?
No, I don't know this story.
Oh, fuck.
I'm in for a treat.
Oh, man. Wait till episode 2 of this, because he holds someone captive, and there's a Stockholm
Oh, shit.
syndrome go on.
Just giving a little teaser.
He makes it on the run for,
Yeah.
7 weeks.
Wow.
But I'm not going to tell you all about that. I'm going to let this go for now.
Yeah, we have to wait for part 2.
Thank you for listening, Tanya.
No, thank you to Leah for.
No, thank you.
No.
No.
No, thank
No.
you.
No, thanks. You. No, thank you. All right. Thank you guys all for taking the time to listen to us. If you haven't done so already, go ahead and hit that subscribe/follow button. Just do it.
Just do it. You can find us on social media.
Yeah. Hardcore true crime.
Instagram and Facebook. If you would like to.
The merchandise. You can go to our website.
Hell yeah.
crimesandconsequences.com. You can also listen to us on crimesandconsequences.com.
And if you want extra episodes.
Yes, tell them all about that, Tanya. You're better at it than me. I have no voice.
Go to our Patreon. It's patreon.com/TNTcrimes. If you would like to hear more episodes, just for a small fee per month, you can get all of them.
Free-ish. No, not free.
No, not free.
Not free.
But if you
They're
join,
exclusive.
Yes, they're exclusive. And you can also get your weekly episode ad-free
And early.
and early.
Yeah.
So go to patreon.com/TNTcrimes to check it out. You can go to our website to check it out too. There'll be a link there.
And there's Apple. You can do the same thing with Apple if you just
Mhm.
subscribe on the Apple Podcast app.
Yep, it's the same episode. So until our next episode.
Don't kill each other.
Bye.